Hello learners, and welcome to this session in which we are going to be discussing the course Disability, Society and Culture, BMDG 171, which is a 6-credit interdisciplinary elective course which is being offered in the 4-year undergraduate program from the January 2025 session onwards. For ages, persons with disability have been regarded in mostly negative terms, either as disability has often been considered as a personal misfortune, a problem or a burden, and persons with disabilities have faced discrimination and exclusion in almost all aspects of life, whether in marriage or family life, up to employment and education. However, in recent years, we find that disability has become a very, very important issue of human rights. And all over the world, persons with disabilities have been receiving their rights, have been receiving or have been experiencing inclusion into the various aspects of society. And therefore, from this whole way of looking at disability as a problem or a misfortune, in today's context, it is seen as a very, very important human rights issue. And therefore, it is very, very important to study this and consider it and discuss it not just as a problem or a crisis, but as something which is very, very much a part of human existence. And this basically is the rationale for this interdisciplinary course. So as you know, disability is a universal human condition, and it can actually affect anybody, anytime or anywhere. Rich or poor, old or young, across cultures and societies, disability is a universal reality. And very often we use this term temporarily able-bodied. So we may be able-bodied right now, but any event or any accident or any kind of crisis can happen which can result in ourselves becoming disabled. So therefore, disability is not something that is to be looked at from a very, very negative perspective. It has to be looked at as something that can affect anybody. And when it can affect anybody, it is also something that we need to negotiate with. It is something that we need to talk about, that we need to discuss. Now, according to the World Health Organization, an estimated 1.3 billion people globally experience significant disability. This represents 16% of the world's population, or 1 out of every 6 of us. So given that this is such a widespread phenomenon, there needs to be much more discussion and much more understanding around it. We also see that as life expectancy increases, as people are living longer, we experience loss of mobility, loss of vision, hearing, etc. Many of us may be experiencing disability in some form or the other, or we may have family members, friends, or acquaintances who may be having a disability. Considering the fact that this is a phenomenon that is all around us, like I said, we need to look at it in a much more holistic way. So this particular course, Disability, Society and Culture, as I've mentioned, is a 6-credit interdisciplinary course which can be opted for by all students in the FYUP program. The course introduces the learners to the issue of disability not just as an individual issue or problem, but rather as an issue of social discrimination, human rights, and social and public policy. And what is important to note is that we don't look at disability as just a medical condition. We also look at its social, psychological, cultural, economic, political, and legal dimensions. So therefore, there is a need to study this issue in a holistic manner. Now, the rights of persons with disabilities has become a very, very important issue of human rights and citizenship. We see that in the contemporary times, persons with disabilities are also entitled to reservations in government jobs, and a lot of provisions have been introduced by governments all over the world, including in our country, to ensure that their rights are given to them and that they may be included in all aspects of life. So ensuring and enabling their inclusion and full participation in all domains of social life is not just important for persons with disabilities themselves, but rather the whole of society can benefit, and therefore inclusion is a very, very important goal. So very often we think of the rights of persons with disabilities as something that is only going to benefit persons with disabilities, whereas in fact it is something that will benefit the society as a whole, because those individuals who can contribute a lot to our life in society, can contribute a lot to our institutions, are at last being included, where earlier they were excluded or left out or marginalized. We also see that all over the world, including in India, persons with disabilities themselves have started mobilizing for their rights and challenging discrimination. Now, keeping all these facts in mind, we have designed this course and spoken basically of 6 themes, 6 major themes, and these thematic blocks and 20 units in the course are basically addressing various dimensions of disability, right from the definitions of disability to disability in various cultural forms, to the various discriminations experienced by persons with disabilities, the laws, the policies, and so on, and also the way in which universal design and assistive technologies can help persons with disabilities to lead a much better quality life. So this particular course is tailored to all undergraduates. You may be pursuing any discipline, but understanding about disability, understanding the requirements of persons with disabilities, and understanding how in your own sphere of life you can create a more inclusive environment is a very, very important attribute which we hope that this particular course will impart to you. So let me go through the various themes, the various blocks of this course so that you get a better understanding of it. So the first block is titled Understanding Disability. This is the most basic. This is the first introduction to disability, and it has 3 units. It examines the various challenges which are experienced by persons with disabilities and their families due to the negative attitudes and barriers that they encounter in all aspects of their life. And importantly, it highlights disability as an issue of social development and social justice. So therefore, we discuss disability as a form of diversity which needs to be valued and respected. What are the units in this block? So the first unit is titled Defining Disability, in which we actually define disability, its types, its causes. We speak of some of the common misconceptions and stereotypes and the various challenges experienced by persons with disabilities and their families. The second unit, Disability and Inequalities, discusses socioeconomic inequalities and discrimination and brings to the forefront the issue of social justice. Unit 3, Changing Perspectives on Disability, takes you through the different ways in which disability has been understood over the years and the recent perspectives on it. In the second part of the program today, we shall be discussing Block 1 in greater detail. Let's move on to Block 2. This block is titled Disability, Social and Cultural Dimensions. This block has 4 units, and it explains how disability has been viewed and how persons with disability have been treated through history, both in India and in other parts of the world. And interestingly, it discusses the cultural dimensions of disability also, how disability is understood in religious beliefs, in cultural beliefs, and creative expressions such as literature, arts, and cinema. So the 4 units of Block 2 basically comprise Unit 4, which is Disability Through History, in which we take a look at the way in which persons of disability have been understood over a long period in various historical phases, and how this understanding has also changed and developed over the various phases of history, right up to the contemporary times, where the understanding of disability as a misfortune has, over a period of time, evolved into an understanding of disability as an issue of social justice and rights, as I mentioned earlier. Unit 5 speaks of how disability is represented in religion, mythology, and folklore. Learners, in our day-to-day life, we often use many phrases, we often use many proverbs in which very unconsciously we use images of disability, or we use terms referring to disability in a very, very derogatory or a negative way. Now, how do these terms, or how do these ways of looking at disability become institutionalized? How do they become set in our minds? This is because in our larger cultural milieu, or in our larger cultural environment, disability is generally viewed in a negative way. For instance, if you look at various folk tales, various myths, various legends, various stories from all over the world, anywhere in the world, you will see that persons with disabilities are portrayed in a very, very specific way. Their disabilities are shown as, in a sense, being a sign of their being problematic characters, or they're having some moral flaw, they're having some problem, they're having some, wickedness in them. So the way in which disability is depicted in many of these folk tales, legends, myths, and so on, shows disability in rather a negative light. Unit 6 speaks of disability in literature and life narratives. So we continue from Unit 5 and come to a discussion of various important texts, various important novels, various important life narratives which are well known in literature, and see the way in which disability has been represented. Regarding life narratives, it's very interesting. A number of narratives have been written by persons with disabilities themselves, which we have discussed in this unit, in which they share stories about their life, the way in which their disabilities have shaped their lives, the kind of treatment that they have received at the hands of various people, and also how they have learned to cope and, in a sense, challenge this very, very negative way in which society and the world has looked at them. So this unit has some very, very interesting insights from different literary texts and creative expressions. Unit 7 is basically about disability in the arts and in cinema. And this, I'm sure, is a unit that most of you will find very, very interesting, because cinema, popular cinema, is very much a part and parcel of our everyday lives. And there are many films in which we see persons with disabilities. And when we look at these films and think about them a little carefully, try and analyze the way in which disability has been depicted, we tend to get a deeper understanding of the way in which society views disability and what are the ways in which we can challenge this view and rethink about disability. Let's move now to Block 3. This block also has 4 units, and it is titled Disability Through the Life Course. So as the title suggests, it takes you through the various stages of human life and the way in which disability is experienced through these various stages. How is it experienced in childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age? What are the different challenges and opportunities that are involved at every stage? Unit 8 is titled Life Worlds of Children with Disabilities. Now, in this particular unit, you will learn about how children with disabilities actually adjust to life. For them, disability is not something which is a great disaster or something very terrible. It is a part of who they are. And how they adjust or how they deal with their life situation in a situation of disability makes for very, very interesting reading. And you will find that the role of the family, the role of the school, the role of the peer group all play a very, very important role in the way in which children with disabilities deal with or experience their disabilities. Unit 9 moves to the next developmental stage, which is the concerns and issues of adolescents and young adults. Now, all of us are aware that the transition from childhood to adolescence is a stage which is difficult for any of us. And for persons with disabilities, it brings with it certain new kinds of challenges which they need to deal with and which we need to be very, very supportive to them to enable them to deal with. And this is precisely what this unit is talking about. When we talk about adulthood, what is adulthood all about? Adulthood is a phase in our life when people marry, set up families, find a job, earn, look after their elderly parents. These are some of the important developmental goals that are part of the experience of adulthood. How are these different for persons with disabilities? This is exactly what this particular unit tries to address. And the 4th unit of this block which is about experiencing aging and disability, looks at the way in which disability is experienced in old age. As I've mentioned earlier in this presentation, very often old age itself brings various kinds of disabling conditions. So we may have aging with disability and disability with aging, and both these dimensions are discussed in this unit. Let's move on now to a discussion of the fourth block. Block 4 is titled Disability and Socioeconomic Realities. It has 3 units, and it discusses in detail the socioeconomic exclusion and marginalization experienced by persons with disabilities. It looks at the intersections, the way in which disability intersects with gender, caste, class, and other identities, and the various challenges that are experienced by persons with disability in accessing essential services such as healthcare, education, jobs, participation in the political process, and so on. Now, this block has 3 units. Unit 12 speaks of disability and its intersections. And here, very, very specifically, we look at how gender and disability reinforce each other. What are the specific issues that women with disabilities experience, which are slightly different from those experienced by men with disability? We also look at other various identity categories such as caste and class in this particular unit. So we find that depending upon your location or depending upon how you are placed in the social order and the social hierarchy, you may experience disability in various different ways. So for instance, a woman who may also be from a very poor socioeconomic class would experience her disability in a rather different way from a male who may be in a middle class or in an upper caste social group. Unit 13 speaks of access to education and health. And here, dear learners, you as students would find this particularly interesting because here we discuss how persons with disabilities negotiate the education system right from primary education to higher education. And also how, within the health system, persons with disabilities often find it difficult to access public health. Unit 14 speaks of political and economic exclusion and opportunities. In other words, it looks at the way in which, in the political process, we find that persons with disabilities really don't form a very strong vote bank as yet. Similarly, in the realm of jobs, because education is denied to many persons with disabilities, their position in the job market also becomes rather difficult and hard. So what are the various kinds of discriminations that are experienced? This is what we will be looking at in Unit 14. The Block 5 speaks of disability, rights, and social justice. This block has 3 units, and after a discussion of the various discriminations and the various challenges experienced by persons with disabilities, we come now to the issue of their rights and how social justice can be ensured. So the block speaks of advocacy, social justice, rights, the growth of the disability rights movement, which has grown all over the world and is recognized as a powerful social movement which advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities. We also speak of the role of civil society. What is the kind of work that is being done by NGOs and other such organizations which are working at the grassroots? And also, very importantly, the various policy frameworks, the various laws, the various different kinds of resolutions that have been passed at both the international and the national levels. And here we discuss in detail our very own Indian Disability Law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, which is a very, very important rights-based legislation. And we discuss the various provisions of this law in some detail. The units in this block basically comprise of the following 3. Unit 15, Activism, Advocacy and Movements. Unit 16, Disability and Civil Society. And Unit 17, Changing Legal Frameworks. The 6th and final unit of this block is titled Disability, Accessibility and Technology. Now, this is a very important block because the technology that is so much a part and parcel of our day-to-day lives, how can it be used by persons with disabilities to enhance their own lives, to make living much easier, to make life, education, working, etc. much easier for them. So this block also has 3 units, and it focuses upon the issue of accessibility, which is a key concern in the lives of persons with disabilities and their rights. It discusses the role of technology and design in creating accessible environments so that persons with disabilities can recognize their full potential. And also, as I've mentioned, it discusses various assistive technologies, various assistive devices that persons with disabilities can use. And also, the concept of universal design is introduced here. So basically, universal design is that which is design which makes access to the environment comfortable to all people, irrespective of ability or disability. So designing our buildings, designing our infrastructure, designing our public spaces in such a way that it becomes comfortable for anybody and everybody to use. So the units in this block are Unit 18, which is physical, social, and technological access, Unit 19, which is about assistive devices, and Unit 20, which is universal design. So that was an overview of the various blocks and units of this course. So let's try and see what is it that you will gain from this course. What are the benefits that you will gain by studying this course? Firstly, you will become sensitized about the various attitudes and barriers that are created by society and culture towards persons with disabilities and learn how to critically question them. You will also understand the issues and the challenges that persons with disability experience in their everyday lives. And therefore, you yourself in your day-to-day lives will adopt inclusive practices, both in your personal as well as in your professional lives. And also, very importantly, you will become aware of the various laws and policies pertaining to the rights of persons with disabilities. You will also develop the capacity to critically examine cultural practices, literature, cinema, and so on with what we call a disability lens, and think of new and respectful ways to understand and talk about disability. You will also, hopefully, cultivate the attitude of inclusivity, empathy, and respect for all kinds of diversity among human beings, irrespective of ability or disability. So these are the broad objectives of this course. Not just is the course going to impart you with a great amount of information on various dimensions of the experience of disability and what it is that persons with disabilities negotiate in their day-to-day lives, but the goal is to make our society more empathetic, more inclusive, so that all of us can learn to respect each other's differences and create a better world for all. So with this, we end the first part, and in the second part, we will be talking more in detail about Block 1 of this course.
Are you interested in television journalism or radio journalism or online journalism? Or do you want to learn with the flexibility of open learning? Or if you are a working professional, wants to enhance your knowledge and skill with certification in the field of electronic media, then School of Journalism and New Media Study, IGNOU, offers PG Diploma in Electronic Media for you. This program includes audio and audio-visual program production for radio, television and online platforms. Here are some important details about the program. We have total 8 courses of 32 credits, 6 theory courses, 1 practical and 1 project. Eligibility: bachelor's degree in any subject. Minimum duration 1 year, maximum 3 years. Medium is English, but the students can write their examinations, assignments, practical and project in Hindi also. So if you are interested in television, radio or online media, please come and join IGNOU's PG Diploma in Electronic Media.
Hello learners. In this part of the program, we are going to be talking about and discussing in greater detail the first block of the course BMDG 171, Disability, Society and Culture. Now this block is titled Understanding Disability, and as I've mentioned earlier, it has 3 units in it. So let's discuss some of the major themes that comprise this block. Let's first try and understand what we mean by the term disability. So what is disability? So disability refers to any kind of physical, mental or intellectual condition due to which an individual or a person may not be able to participate in the activities of society on an equal basis as those without disability. So this is a very, very basic kind of a definition. So for instance, if a person is visually impaired, if a person cannot see, it is quite obvious that they will not be able to participate in society, in various activities of the society, in the same way as a sighted person. They may not be able to go to the movies and see the screen. They may have difficulty in the school experience where in case there are no provisions for braille or any other kinds of facilities for them. A person with a limb condition, a person who has difficulty in walking, may have difficulties in negotiating the physical space around them, may have difficulty in going to various public buildings and so on and so forth. However, what is important to note is that the reason that they cannot participate on the same basis as persons without disabilities is because the world or the environment is designed for non-disabled persons. This is something which we'll be talking about in greater detail in a bit. So had our environment been more comfortable or disabled friendly, then persons with disabilities also would have been able to access the environment in much the same way as persons who do not have a disability. So what are the various kinds of disabilities? So disabilities may be temporary or permanent, they may be present since birth, or they may be congenital, or they may be acquired later in life. So for instance, if a person slips and breaks a leg, has a fracture, they may be temporarily disabled. Once the leg heals, they will be able to walk again. A person who may be in an accident and lose their sight or lose their hearing becomes permanently disabled. Certain individuals are born with various kinds of disabilities, for instance, intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome. Many of these conditions are present since birth, whereas several other kinds of disabilities may be acquired later in the course of the life, due to illness, due to accidents, and so on. And disabilities may be physical, they may be sensory, they may be intellectual, or psychosocial. So let's quickly look at some of the major causes. As we've mentioned, accidents, illness, natural disaster, conflict, or man-made disasters. We see all around the world there are a number of conflicts, there are a number of wars, there are a number of such events happening, and a large number of people become temporarily or permanently disabled as a consequence of conflict. One of the very, very important factors in disability is poverty. So we say that there is a bidirectional connection between disability and poverty. Frequently, poverty causes disability, and often disability results in poverty. So poverty, which includes lack of access to basic facilities of food, healthcare, sanitation, and clean drinking water, may lead to individuals becoming or getting various kinds of disabilities, which could have been prevented if they had had access to these basic facilities. Higher life expectancy, as we've mentioned earlier, there are a lot of problems that are associated with aging. There are a lot of different kinds of disabilities associated with aging. Many of you may have heard of the term Alzheimer's condition or dementia, which a lot of persons who live to a fairly ripe old age may acquire during the course of their life. There are also congenital disabilities or disabilities that an individual may be born with due to genetic factors. And very often, many of them have no real identifiable cause. Another very important factor in causing disability, or one of the important causative factors in disability, which is recently being studied in great detail by scholars of disability studies, is environmental degradation and climate change. So this is also a very, very important factor. For instance, in places where climate change results in terrains, results in a lot of soil being washed away, or environmental degradation, we may find that individuals may find it difficult to survive, may find it difficult to get their basic existence, and therefore become subject to or fall prey to various kinds of illnesses, various kinds of conditions, which may result in their becoming disabled in the long run. Factors like age, gender, caste, class, and other social factors play a very important role in how disability is experienced. So, for instance, a girl child with disability may be considered in a very, very different way. She may be considered a burden. She may be considered somebody who it is very difficult to care for, because she's both female as well as she's somebody with disability. So the birth of a girl child in the family who has disability may be seen in a very, very negative way, and it may result in her being subject to fatal neglect. She may not be given proper food, nutrition, in the hope that she does not survive. So we find that gender plays a very, very important role in how disability is experienced. So therefore, when we speak of disability, we define it as a complex interaction of the individual's medical condition along with the barriers in the environment, the attitudes of society, and other social factors. So what is important to note that a disability is not merely medical. It is not just the physical condition of an individual that makes him or her disabled. It is the way in which the other factors, societal attitudes, access to the various goods in society, access to the various facilities in society, how they all interact with the individual's medical condition and therefore create situations in which the individual finds it difficult to participate in the day-to-day activities of society. So the definition of disability that has been given according to our Indian law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, is as follows. A person with disability means a person with long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment which in interaction with barriers hinders his full and effective participation in society equally with others. So you see here in this definition, we speak about the impairment, that is the actual physical condition, and we also speak of barriers, that is the various barriers that are there in society or in the attitudes of people towards that individual, which hinder that individual's participation in society on the same basis as others. Let's quickly run through the 21 types of disabilities that have been notified by India's Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. So the disabilities that are notified include blindness, low vision, leprosy-cured persons, hearing impairment, locomotor disability, dwarfism, intellectual disability, mental illness, autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, chronic neurological conditions, specific learning disabilities, multiple sclerosis, speech and language disability, thalassemia, hemophilia, sickle cell disease, multiple disabilities including deaf blindness, acid attack victim, Parkinson's disease. So we are not going to study in detail about any of these because the scope of our course is not really trying to get a medical understanding of disability, but rather looking at disability in its social and its cultural context. Let's speak a little bit more about the barriers that I discussed earlier. Environmental as well as attitudinal barriers. So environmental barriers are when public spaces and facilities, which all of us need to use in our day-to-day life, are inaccessible or impossible to access. For instance, badly maintained roads, poor street lighting, no ramps, no lifts, etc. All these make it very hard for a person with disability to access public space. It's not just that these negatively impact persons with disabilities. What about somebody who is very tired, for instance? If I'm extremely tired and I'm holding a very heavy suitcase, if there is no lift, it will be very, very difficult for me as a person who may not be disabled, but as a person who's carrying a heavy weight and who may be elderly or who may be not feeling too well and so on and so forth. So this means that the physical environment is inaccessible to the different needs of different kinds of people at various points of time. Now, environmental barriers can still be taken care of. So for instance, if you have an environment or a physical structure or a physical space which is not disabled friendly, remedial measures can be taken. Lifts can be installed, the roads can be smoothened out, the street lights can be put in place, and so on and so forth. So there are ways in which the environment can be attended to and be made disabled friendly. But the more difficult thing really to address is the second point, which is attitudinal barriers. So attitudinal barriers refer to negative attitudes and stereotypes, the various negative ways of looking at persons with disabilities. Very often our attitudes towards persons with disabilities are choked with superstition, with fear, shame, ridicule, embarrassment, and so on. Very often we find it very difficult to even make eye contact with a person with disability because we really don't know how to approach them. We don't know how to talk with them. We don't know whether what we are saying may be taken in a negative way. We don't know what is the correct terminology to use. So there is a lot of social awkwardness and a lot of social embarrassment around disability, which is something that we really need to work on. And this is one of the aims of this course, in fact, which will help us to look at disability not as something which is very strange or something which is very unusual, but which is an experience of everyday life and which needs to be treated in a respectful and a courteous way. So we refer to the term ableism, or viewing persons with disabilities as inferior to non-disabled persons, which leads to discrimination. So learners, you may have heard of terms like sexism, in which one gender is looked at in a negative way. You may have heard of terms like casteism, in which a particular community may be looked down upon by the larger community, racism, and so on. Similarly, we use the term ableism, wherein we refer to the attitude that is prevalent in a large number of persons in society to consider disability as something inferior or a state which is not desirable. Let's look at some of the common misconceptions. What are some of the common understandings about disability which are actually not correct and which need to be rectified? So many people seem to think that disability is a punishment for sins that are committed by the affected persons or family. We may hear in our day-to-day discourse, oh, that poor child is born with disability. Definitely it is some sin that has been committed by the mother or the father. Definitely some wrongdoing has happened. Very commonly we hear, definitely in the past life, this individual may have committed some crime or done something bad, that he or she is being punished in the present life. So this is a very, very common misconception around disability. Another very commonly heard, concept is that persons with disability are incapable of doing anything on their own. They are helpless, they are like permanent children, they need constant care, they will never be able to become independent, and so on. So this is a very, very common perception. We often find that even if a person with disability is an adult, people talk to them in the same tone that they will talk to a small child. Now, this can be very insulting to an adult with a disability because they're not small children. They are grown-up people, right? So there are ways in which we need to think about the way we talk to persons with disabilities, the way we think about them. So with correct training, with correct socialization, we will find that persons with disabilities are perfectly capable of doing all the things that persons without disability also are capable of doing. It is just that they need to be trained. There needs to be a good deal of sensitization at the level of the family. Now, it is also seen that certain kinds of disabilities, for instance, conditions like autism or psychosocial disabilities, what we call mental illnesses, these have a particularly negative view around them. And very often people consider that persons with these kinds of disabilities are violent, they are uncontrolled, they are incapable of living in society, they are harmful, and this often leads to them being locked up, locked away from the gaze of society and not really being able or being allowed to be a part of the society in which we live in. There is also one very interesting way of looking at disability in which people think that persons with disabilities have certain special abilities or extraordinary talents, that they may be extraordinary singers, they may be extraordinary artists, and so on and so forth. Now, while this is a positive way of looking at certain kinds of disabilities, it must be pointed out that just like in the non-disabled population, some people may have extraordinary talents and some people don't. They're just ordinary people. Similarly, persons with disabilities, some of them may have enormous talents, but some may just be ordinary people. So this kind of stereotype that if a person has a particular kind of disability, they're extraordinary at music or at mathematics or at art, this is also something which is really a misconception and not actually a reality for everybody. Let's talk now about the discriminations experienced by persons with disabilities. Now, to quote the World Bank, persons with disabilities are more likely to experience adverse socioeconomic outcomes, such as less education, poorer health outcomes, lower levels of employment, higher poverty rates. Poverty may increase the risk of disability through malnutrition, inadequate access to education and healthcare, unsafe working conditions, a polluted environment, and lack of access to safe water and sanitation. So the relationship between poverty and disability is a two-way relationship. On the one hand, being poor may lead to individuals becoming more vulnerable to disability, and on the other hand, being disabled may result in individuals becoming poor or falling into poverty because they don't have access to education, employment, and so on. So the link between poverty and disability is something that we have studied or that we will read about in detail in this course. Let's talk about disability and inequalities to continue from the previous point. So we see that persons with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty, which is what I've just mentioned. They may lack access to healthcare and rehabilitation services. They may lack access to education. Gender inequalities are a very important factor, what we call double discrimination of women with disabilities. So because they are women, they're discriminated against, and because they are disabled, there is another layer of discrimination. One of the very serious issues and challenges faced by persons with disabilities is the risk of violence and abuse. So this kind of violence is not just physical violence. It may also be emotional or psychological violence. So if a person with disability, if a child with disability is constantly being made to feel that he or she is inferior, he or she is useless, he or she cannot do anything, this causes a lot of psychological damage in which the individual thinks that really they are incapable of doing anything. And this is a very, very serious challenge that needs to be addressed. Also, the other kinds of violence and abuse, we find that sexual abuse of women with disabilities is a very, very serious issue. And very often, because these women cannot run or they cannot articulate what has happened with them, they cannot tell anybody what has happened with them, they continue to be victims of abuse. And this is a very, very serious challenge that has to be addressed by the society and by the legal system. We also find that very often persons with disabilities are subjected to forcible treatments or forcibly put into institutions, asylums, hospitals, very often against their will. And this is more the case in certain kinds of disabilities such as mental health issues or conditions like autism and so on, wherein persons with disability or children particularly may be subjected to all kinds of treatments which are decided upon by their parents, but which the children themselves may find very, very difficult. But their voices are not heard, their opinions are not sought, and they are subjected to these treatments in the hope that this will cure them or this will make them better. Let's talk now about something very important. So far, a lot of what we have been discussing has to do with attitudes that emanate in the family. And so there is a great need to talk about disability and the family, because disability is not just an individual issue, it has an impact on the physical, emotional, and financial status of the family as a whole. We find that there is often a lot of social stigma, that is, a way in which families are made to feel that they are inferior because they have a person with disability. Persons with disabilities are made to feel excluded and neglected, and this then carries over to the whole family. So this kind of lack of acceptance can be extremely hard for the family as a whole, and of course for the person with disability themselves. We also see that the gender roles and caregiving responsibilities within the family very often put a large burden upon the women in the household, particularly the mothers. So the mother, or in the case of an adult with disability, perhaps the wife or the sister or any female caregiver in the family, she is the one who is really expected to take care of the individual. And this may lead to what we call caregiver burnout, because the constant care, the constant, attention that has to be given to the individual may result in the caregiver herself not taking care of her own health, her own needs, and may cause a lot of mental health difficulties as well. So there is a very, very urgent need to empower families and to provide them with support. Provide them with financial, physical, psychological, social, all kinds of support so that the family unit itself may be happy and accepting, and therefore the individual with disability has the best chance of leading a fulfilled and highly included life. When the family is comfortable, when the family is accepting, this attitude or this kind of way of dealing with the individual with disability then also translates into the community. So the community also becomes more accepting. And therefore, this leads to a win-win situation, both for the individual as well as for the family. Let's now quickly talk about some of the changing perspectives on disability. We have been mentioning that earlier disability used to be regarded strictly in a very, very negative way. But over a period of time, over the years, we find that attitudes towards disability are becoming more accepting. Attitudes towards disability are becoming more rights-oriented. The human rights, the needs of individuals with disabilities to be included, to get the same facilities, to get the same entitlements as other members of society, these have also become very important in the thinking of societies and also in the laws and the various institutions all over the world. So earlier, there used to be a more what we call a religious model of looking at disability, wherein disability was seen as a punishment for sins. In our context, we often speak about karma, or God's will, that God has inflicted an individual with disability in a way to test them or to test the family. And therefore, when there is disability, the way in which we deal with it also has to be through charity, through daan, through giving alms, through basically engaging in charity and donations, or what we call philanthropic works, so that we are able to take care of persons with disabilities. Now, you see, the problem with this way of looking at disability makes the person with disability in a way in an unequal power relation with the non-disabled person. So if somebody is giving them alms, somebody is giving them charity, then they can receive it. But whether or not charity is given depends upon the will, or depends upon the desire, or depends upon the intent of the person who is giving the charity. So anytime that charity may be withdrawn. So in a sense, the individual with disability is dependent upon the charity or the goodwill or the philanthropy of others. So here, their rights, their right to a good life is really not taken into consideration. What we are looking at is a way of individuals trying to do charity in order that their own religious or moral merit may be enhanced, so that they may feel good about themselves, rather than, in fact, trying to change the situation on the ground for persons with disabilities. Another very, very important, probably the most important way of looking at disability, or a model of disability, is what we call the medical model. So for a very, very long time, ever since biomedicine really, became very important, disability has been considered as a medical condition which is to be managed and controlled by professionals. In the subsequent, when we have subsequent discussions on the various blocks and the various units of this course, we will be talking about this in more detail. But what this really means is that individuals with disability are subjected to the eye of medicine. Whatever the doctor prescribes or whatever the medical professionals prescribe for them, that is really their destiny. However, their own will, their own ways of looking at their condition are really not taken much into account. It is the way in which the medical profession sees them and how the medical profession plans to fix or to rehabilitate them. So in response to the charity and the medical models, a very important model of disability, which we call the social model, emerged in Europe and America in the 1980s. And the social model is really what has changed global outlooks on disability and has led to the growth of disability studies as a whole area of study and discussion. Here, impairment or the person's physical condition is distinguished from the social barriers or the discrimination that the individual experiences. So, for example, an individual may be visually impaired, but because you have not provided the individual with any kinds of facilities or assistive technology or braille, that individual is finding it very difficult to function in society. But when you provide the individual these facilities, that individual will be able to perform or will be able to make use of the various facilities or make use of the various physical and social spaces that are available for all of us. The biopsychosocial model is also a very important model which really looks at both the individual and social factors along with the psychological and environmental factors together. And the human rights model, which is basically focused upon equal rights, citizenship, laws and policies to ensure the rights of persons with disabilities, is a very, very important model which has been adopted by the United Nations and several other world bodies, and which is really what is present in all the laws in which persons with disabilities are treated as citizens with rights. So basically, what we try to do in this particular block as well as in the course as a whole is to look at disability as a form of human diversity. So social attitudes towards persons with disability are gradually changing. From viewing it as a tragedy or a misfortune, it can be seen as an expression of diversity or value. Persons with disabilities are asserting their rights, and laws and policies promoting inclusion are being implanted. And humankind can make real progress only if, as the Sustainable Development Goals say, no one is left behind. So these are some of the major themes that Block 1, Understanding Disability, covers, and it provides you with a holistic understanding of the meaning of disabilities and the way in which the concept of disability has evolved over the past few decades. Thank you.